What's up guys? In this video, I'm going to cover some of the common criticisms I hear regarding resistance bands, that they're an overrated product with inflated margins, delivering some false promises, and basically produce subpar muscle gains, especially compared to, say, free weights or machines. Of course, there's always been opinions around resistance bands, but I'd say prior to around 2019, 2020, resistance bands, while steadily growing still in popularity over time, were primarily reserved as an accessory tool for resistance training, something you did in a pinch or while traveling, like I'm doing right now. In the background of this video, you're gonna see some workouts I've been doing, or they were seen as like a rehabilitation tool or something you might find in like a Group X class. And I find we're at this point now where some people have subscribed solely to 100% resistance band systems from a lot of these products that are coming out over these last 4 years. Or you're on the other side of the fence where people find this, again, pretty much as a novel, somewhat useful tool, but at the end of the day, it's really not gonna stick, and this is gonna be a fad that might eventually run its course. And in some ways, I kind of agree with that camp, but I certainly also sympathize with the other side as well. I kind of find myself somewhere in the middle because on one end of the spectrum, I promote them. I think they're extremely underrated. However, I don't elevate them really any higher than I think they need be. So I really do sympathize with both sides of the aisle, being those that really love resistance bands, and I can understand people that, I don't want to say hate, but don't think they're really that special. What I'm simply going to do in this video is address some of these comments and criticisms that I often hear and I think are some of the roots of some of these arguments, also pro and con. This is certainly a video I want to hear what you guys have to say, because I've heard many things under the sun from people that have subscribed solely to, like I've been saying, to just using resistance bands, ditching the free weights, and they're never going to look back, to other people saying, yeah, I tried resistance bands a few years ago, I actually lost strength, I lost muscle mass, and I'm never going to experiment with them again as a sole form of resistance training. Definitely one of those commentary videos. If you like stuff like this, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Let me know in the comment section if you guys want to see more videos like this. Now, this first part I want to get into, I was debating where to kind of put this, but I'm going to put it right up front. I really think that a lot of what we see, just like everything else in all culture right now, is in large part nature of just influence. You find people that are generally pushing kind of the band narrative, which ironically, when I talk to people, and I won't name names, you can actually find this for yourself. A lot of people that actually promote and sell resistance bands or resistance band influencers that are out there, they typically will actually either be going to the gym or they're also using free weights on top of that. But it could be their product or their brand might be pushing more this facade that they might be training just with resistance bands and kind of selling it as, well, you don't need a gym, you don't need free weights. This is just another option you can use at your disposal. That I definitely think is an influence and very attractive to a lot of people. Maybe you're just getting into a form of physical fitness and logically it makes sense. Well, I'm not going to invest all this money in a gym membership, a bunch of equipment, expensive equipment. I'll just invest in some bands and see where that gets me. But there's also another side of the story, which is you don't see influencers really covering resistance band content or products because it doesn't really make sense financially. I'm not judging them for this or any sense of the means, but it kind of makes sense to cover bigger, more expensive pieces of equipment. And I've had people blatantly just tell me it's why they don't cover resistance band products, because those affiliate numbers, percentages just don't make sense. And so a lot of people from an average consumer standpoint might see, well, I'm not seeing my favorite influencer or gym content reviewer talking about bands, therefore they must not be as nearly as effective. But at the end of the day, basically what I'm saying is, depending on who you're following and who you're subscribing to, if you see someone more likely using bands, you're more likely to adopt it. If you kind of don't see them, they're out of sight, out of mind in a resistance band community, you might not think they have much value, and then you might not even invest in them in the first place. But just like everything else, our own perception on if something works or doesn't work, or something is a good product or bad product, of course, a large part of this is on marketing. And resistance bands are one of those products that if you're either going to buy into it because of the marketing, or you're gonna buy out of it and think it's a total scam based on some of these marketing tactics that you're seeing coming from resistance band companies or influencers. But of course, these companies aren't doing anything that any other company, especially in the fitness industry, is not already doing. Of course, they wanna make a product, they wanna make the most amount of margins, and they wanna make some money. And it should kind of go without saying, that's another kind of a pushback, that resistance bands have some of the highest margins with regards to like fitness equipment. When you're comparing something that weighs much less compared to like iron and steel and heavy equipment or heavy weights, that alone just drastically cuts down the cost. But if you also consider the margins on resistance bands in the market, which I've definitely looked into and I've done some research and talked to owners about this, and I will say there are differences in band quality, even though they all say they're premium latex or something like that. And also not even getting into the resistance band accessories, which can be various straps and things like that, which also can have very high margins. So from a strictly business point of view, if you're looking to get into fitness products and just sales, resistance bands and related products are one of the best ways to go about doing that. Also have to mention that you're talking about a product that eventually is going to degrade over time and has to be replaced, unlike say free weights, which essentially can last you decades. But what causes people to kind of roll their eyes at some of this marketing is we're talking about a product that, aside from some minor innovations, is essentially getting repackaged and rebranded by some people as the only way or a superior complete training system that essentially negates any need for going to the gym or buying expensive machines or using dumbbells or free weights or any kind of traditional means. So it's very easy for people to get very cynical very fast by the claims put out there by these companies and influencers when you compare what most people are kind of seeing, you know, with their own eyes. But on top of this, I hear this kind of cognitive dissonance that people are saying to me, where on one side of the fence, people are saying this is all you need to get, you know, great muscle mass, train your body at home with, you know, little equipment, little time, versus people grinding it out in the gym. And this has been a phrase or a question that's been asked to me very often, either directly or indirectly. And that is, yeah, I can see the idea of using bands to kind of define or tone your body up a little bit like a weekend warrior. You have a good athletic build, but I'm just not seeing anybody actually put on decent mass, decent size, or actually build big muscles using resistance bands in the basic landscape of things. And again, I can kind of identify with that a little bit, because you certainly see people that if they do adopt solely just using resistance bands, it's not that I think it's impossible to gain muscle using resistance bands. Of course, resistance is resistance, but what starts to happen is you're really limiting yourself to what exercises, first off, are at your disposal, and then also probably some better exercises that don't get more cumbersome, especially if you start progressively overloading bands. It just starts to get kind of awkward and weird the heavier the weight kind of goes up towards. So I can kind of see what they're saying when they talk about these like band bodies, whether people are just more skinny and they have some muscle on them, where especially with the before and afters, you see people that blatantly just basically lost weight and you see their muscles just a little more visually. But as far as like muscle mass size increases, you don't see that as much. But I think that's kind of a hard distinction because there's a lot of variables at play in there. My only point would be, if you're solely limited to just using resistance bands, I think that's just as limiting as saying you're gonna go to the gym with all this equipment and you're just gonna use the dumbbell section. There's a lot of machines, a lot of other equipment, all of our modes at your disposal that it would be kind of a limiting factor to just ways you can progress your body, ways you can increase resistance, also in a way that's a little more direct, more cumbersome, and of course, different exercise, different body parts might have different needs. And that's what I said before with resistance bands, what you're seeing here. I think there's some fundamental basic things that work really well, but there are some things that I would say, you know, are much better used with free weights, machines, or something else. But I do think the band-only camp that says that the absolute end-all be-all are kind of in the minority. I think people that do adopt that mentality of just using bands is generally out of practical reasons. So I think most people typically like resistance bands because of the fact that they are affordable, they're an easier path of entry, they're extremely portable. People will say they find them to be easier on the joints, and I tell people I think that's somewhat true, but you definitely can aggravate and cause injuries, no question, with band exercises. Some things actually feel very uncomfortable of some simple things, but I think 9 times out of 10, if they are more comfortable, I tell people, especially with comparing to free weights, just drop that weight in the weight you're using for traditional free weights, go a little bit slower, and I think you're gonna find that also will be equally less stressful on the joints. I hear stories very practically of people that find, just from an accountability standpoint, from all ages, but typically tend to be older individuals, that they love the idea they can get out of bed, they can train anywhere, whether on vacation or whether it's any time of the day. They don't need to sign into a gym, they don't need heavy weights, they can throw this stuff in their gym bag, they can work out outside. Those to me seem to be one of the practical reasons just for increasing exercise adherence. But if I were to really summarize what I'm trying to say here, I don't really blame the companies or the brands that are pushing resistance bands. I think they're just doing what every other company essentially does. I think a lot of the heat with bands in recent years really comes down to the consumer and then individual community level, which even community level, like I'm talking about Facebook groups or forums and things like that, people are piggybacking on each other and the things they're saying. And I don't think everyone is, you know, diehard dogmatic about bands. It might just be a practical, just literal community. But of course, you do see areas, in some areas, where people will say, if you're saying anything bad about bands, or you knock them, or you say they're not as comparable to free weights, you're immediately kind of kicked out. I think some of that stuff is for sure orchestrated, but again, I can't blame a company for doing that because I think everybody wants some sort of diehard community. However, I think that is basically creating this divide of people that are diehard for or diehard against them. And I certainly see this all the time. I really can't say anything good or bad against them without getting someone having some sort of heat on it. My general advice to most people, and I say this in the backdrop of all my videos, is I think it's good to keep an open mind. Do not think dogmatic. Don't treat exercise as a religion, especially as something as trivial as exercise equipment. Try not to fall victim to camps or these exercise ideologies that at the end of the day not only limit your goals with what you're trying to do in the first place, but also you really miss out on just basic enjoyment of training and trying something new. And this of course applies to people that are against resistance bands and think they're completely worthless. So while I think it's short-sighted to overstretch the claims of resistance bands, I think it's equally short-sighted and a bad idea to discard bands altogether. But to wrap this up and to make my point, I am using something in this video that is one of the most polarizing fitness products, the most polarizing probably resistance band product, probably set the stage for what I'm getting into in this video. It was something I kind of rolled my eyes at, but I only picked it up and bought it because you guys kept asking for it in the channel. But as much as I've covered this thing and covered knockoff versions, cheaper alternatives, even created a product that essentially allows you to turn any 2-inch barbell and doing the same feature, I still inherently like the aesthetics of it. I don't subscribe to a lot of the stuff that goes on in the backdrop, but why I keep throwing this thing in my bag, and I get this question all the time, is because I aesthetically just like the way it looks. It fits conveniently in my gym bag, and I use it as a practical tool. So while I like the way it looks, I like the way it feels, to me, it's worth it just because for its basic function, there's nothing else compared like that. In a similar way that I just recently picked up an expensive barbell that you could definitely say maybe was overpriced, you paid more, and for sure there's margins that are being worked out for something. At the end of the day though, I'm not putting a philosophy and ideology into the products I'm picking up. I'm buying them purely, generally out of the way of what they do, their function, aesthetically how they look, but at the end of the day, they're just another tool in the toolbox. So I think that's a good way to kind of look at resistance bands. Happy to hear though, and I'm sure I will hear some of your guys, what works for you with resistance bands. One of the things I do like about bands, especially, and I said this many times, is they are very simple, effective tools to kind of get the job done. So if you're somebody who just wants to define parts of your body, you got limited time, limited resources, don't want to spend a lot of money, you want to travel, an inexpensive band set I think does do the job with some very basic exercises. So that is it. Let me know your guys' thoughts and opinions, and I will see you guys on the next video.